Washington, D.C. is my home away from home. I've worked here for the better part of 3 decades as a founder, entrepreneur, policy expert, and author.
Probably the longest title. Everybody sort of shortened it to ONC for sanity's sake.
Mercifully.
Yeah, mercifully.
I've learned leadership secrets from many healthcare executives who understand that Washington is the largest payer and regulator of healthcare.
She said, well, because you'll never get a husband if you do that.
I began interviewing healthcare leaders many years ago because what better way to learn how they think, why they make it to the top, and how they remained there. Think about what was your most challenging engagement.
Healthcare has been the most difficult problem, I think. Let me just say that.
We'll talk about that later. From a small town in Wisconsin to big company boardrooms, Mindy Mount shares her multifaceted experience in business. She tells the story of her analytical background and how that guided and aided her career. She describes her passion for business and interest in making businesses better. We gain a better understanding of the expectations of board members, finding the right balance between governance and management. We discuss what qualities are necessary to be a good board member and the role of the audit committee. Mindy pulls from her diverse experience on 5 different boards, including Cerner Corporation, Technicolor, the Learning Care Group, Group 9 Acquisition Corp., and Zayo, representing both public and private companies. Mindy dives into the unique challenges COVID-19 created for the companies of which she is a director and how the boards related to management. For early career listeners, if you want to become a member of a board of directors, Mindy recommends emphasizing building an industry or tactical expertise and developing and expanding your networks. Well, good morning, Mindy, and welcome.
Good morning, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're pleased to have you at the microphone. You have such a rich background, spent time on Wall Street, operating companies, Times Warner and Microsoft, Jawbone. And you sit on at least 5 boards. So we'd like to spend a lot of time on the boards aspect of your life, since there's a question about leading from a board seat that I'd love to have you comment on. But why don't we get to know you a bit better, and that'll help us kind of get your views of leadership. So what was life like growing up, Mindy, for you?
I grew up in a fairly small town in Wisconsin. We had 4 kids in the family. I was third of 4 with brothers on either side of me who, were merciless in teasing me, which actually later ended up being super helpful when I got to Wall Street, having already endured that through my youth. I was quite a tomboy. I loved being outdoors, climbing trees, riding my bike, very athletic, and also was a big reader. Later, when I look back at my life, I realized I think one of my biggest role models was Nancy Drew. And I read all those books. I really admired her adventure, her sense of adventure and independence. And in a way, I think I later modeled a lot of that.
Well, what did the young Mindy think about leadership?
When I was young, I didn't really think much about leadership. I never really thought about, my family had a business and my dad was running that business with a cousin of his. And so I certainly had the opportunity to hear a lot about business growing up. My brother was in sports. I didn't do team sports. That was, very much in the sort of early days of Title IX. There weren't as many team sports. I did a lot of individual things. So my sense of leadership, I think it was a lot more about kind of being the leader myself. Like, how do I work harder? How do I try to do better? How do I study harder? I was very competitive. And pretty ambitious as a kid. And so a lot of my thoughts about leadership were more around how I could be better at the things that I did. I was a competitive horseback rider. I did sailing. I grew up in a lake. And did gymnastics. And so I was always trying to be better at the sports I did. And at the same time, try to be a better student. And try to overcome the tendency to want to, not do that homework. Ironically, in my early years of school, I was very good in English. I loved reading, as I said. I was actually not that great in math. And it was only once I did very bad in math that I kind of realized I had to get my act together. And I started working very hard to try to improve my math abilities, and much to my surprise, found out that I loved it by the time I was a senior in high school.
Well, with your major in actuarial sciences in college, you really did take to numbers and statistics and so on. So what about your parents? You mentioned your father. Do you think your leadership style came at all from your parents?
In some respects, certainly. I think both my parents were quite patient and dealt with, whatever family challenges came along pretty, with a sense of optimism and how they're going to deal with it. And my brother had a very severe accident, my younger brother, and, the family just marched through it. The canning business, my family had this business that canned and froze vegetables, very cyclical business. We had some years that were really good. We had some years that were really bad. Crops were bad, weather was bad, pricing would be bad. And so I had the chance to kind of see how you fare through the ups and downs. And in the downs, certainly they were very good role models, and just, you just tighten your belt. You have the optimism that next year is going to be better. And I think in many respects, I learned from that. And I think they were also very good in terms of just being patient. Neither of them were people who had big tempers around things. They tended to laugh off difficult people. And I think I learned some of those skills about how do you deal with people in a way that helps make them feel better, but yet at the same time works through the challenges that you may have with a particular individual.
Yeah, I think out of all the interviews I've done, Mindy, you're the very first person that has a degree in actuarial science. What kind of caused you to think about that and to pursue that?
Yeah, it is a little unusual. Well, I went to University of Wisconsin. First of all, they offer it as a major. There's only a handful of universities in the Midwest at that time that did that. Typically, they were founded by local insurance. It's the mathematics of insurance. The reason I I ended up in that was that I went to college thinking I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I loved animals. And it was very hard. Wisconsin did not have a vet school at that time, so it was very hard to be a vet, and I was going to have to be admitted to an out-of-state school. And so I started my freshman year taking chemistry and biology and all these science-related courses. Well, I got to tell you, I was a disaster in biology, and in chemistry, I was really good on the chemistry exams. I was getting 98s, 100s on all the chemistry exams. I was a disaster in the lab. I mean, I was failing almost every lab. I just wasn't careful. I used to love to cook a lot. And, when you cook, it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I tried to carry that over to my lab work, which didn't really work. So by the end of first semester of college, I realized I'm going to have to regroup here. I'm never going to make this. I can't get through a semester, much less multiple years. So what am I going to do? And I thought back about what is it I really enjoy about chemistry? Why am I doing so well on these exams? And I realized it was the mathematics of chemistry that I really loved. And so I said, okay, well, that's interesting. Well, why don't I look at business and maybe some kinds of business fields that would use mathematics? Because I grew up around business. My dad always brought business home. It was something I was very comfortable with and had an interest in. So I remember I went to the business school and they had a little booklet that had all of the majors in it. And I started reading through the booklet. And of course, one of the first majors was actuarial science. And it said, it's applied statistics. Yeah, it was an A. So there we go. No, but it said it was applied statistics. Business of insurance. And I thought that could be interesting. So I called my dad. I said, do you know anything about this? He said, well, I don't know anything about it, but I know some people who work at Northwestern Mutual, which is in Milwaukee, and let me call them and see if I can find someone who could tell you a little bit more about it. Well, it turned out he was able to get me a day to go into the offices of Northwestern Mutual and actually meet some actuaries during my Christmas break. My first year of college. So I went into Northwestern Mutual and I met some of the young actuaries that they had on staff, and they explained what actuarial science was. They explained that you have to take a lot of exams. And then the most impressive thing to me is the chief actuary of Northwestern Mutual took me to lunch in the executive dining room. Well, I got to tell you, for those of you listeners, you probably don't remember, but in the early 90s, it was actually a very tough economic climate. And it was not necessarily easy to get a job. I was so impressed. I thought if they have such a need for actuaries that they're going to take someone who's vaguely thinking about this out to lunch in the executive dining room, this must be a great profession. Like, this is the profession for me.
I love it.
Yeah. So the next semester, and I was very pragmatic, and I said, look, I'm going to take the classes that I need to take, and as long as I like it, I'll stay in the major, and if I don't like it, then we'll see what's next. So the next semester, I started taking calculus and computer science, and I really enjoyed both of those classes, and I just kept with it. And part of the fun of the major when I was at Madison is that I was at this huge university, but the actuarial science major, as you can imagine, was quite small. There were about 10 of us in the major. So I also, it gave me the fun of being in a huge university, but yet having this very intimate group of people and professors. There were 2 or 3 professors that you had almost all your classes with the last 2 years of business school. So it ended up being quite a fun experience.
Well, it sounds like a small group in your actuarial sciences major and maybe a small group in your newly formed sorority. So you were able to have a couple of small groups inside this large university. So off to Harvard Business School, then actually working in actuarial sciences for a while, and then to investment banking. What caused that shift to pull you into Wall Street?
I went to New York after graduating school. Once again, I'll say a separate theme. I will say, if I think about probably one of the most significant decisions I made in my career, it was going to New York City after college, which is not a common thing for Wisconsin people to do. And I will say, in part, it was my dad kind of pushed me to go to New York. I mean, I kind of wanted to work for Northwestern Mutual. I thought I liked Wisconsin. I liked the country. And, he very strongly said, look, there's just not great opportunities for women in Wisconsin. I think you're going to be way better off in New York. And I was not a rebellious youth. I listened to him. I thought, that there's some logic to that. And at the end of the day, Wisconsin's not going anywhere. I can always come back. So I went to New York, and I really enjoyed being in New York. I enjoyed my job as an actuary. But what I found after a few years is it was very repetitious. I was doing pension employee benefits consulting, and you'd have 20 people, 20 customers, and you would often be telling them the same things. There's a new law, and then you'd tell them how that law impacted them. But I found it repetitious. But by being in New York, then I started meeting other people and seeing other things. And I met some people who were investment bankers. I'd never even heard of such a thing in Wisconsin. And so I started paying attention, and that was, in the 80s with the rise of Wall Street and the merger and acquisition environment. And it all seemed so exciting. And as you from when I talked about I was a kid, I was a little bit of a daredevil. And so when I heard about this exciting world of Wall Street, that looked like fun. It looked like maybe a little bit more fun than being an actuary. So I asked people, how do you get to be an actuary? And they said, well, you got to how do you get to be an investment banker? And they said, well, you want to work for one of the big firms, you're going to have to go to business school to go work for one of the big firms. So that's what I did. I packed myself up to Harvard for 2 years. And so when I graduated, I ended up working for Morgan Stanley.
Then you went on to operating businesses, but what did you take away from your time at Morgan Stanley that was useful to you as an executive and now in your board roles?
Quite a bit. First of all, at a very fundamental level, you get excellent training in sort of finance and technical finance. You're running models, you're working around very smart people, you're analyzing financials, you're looking at companies. And so you get very, very good grounding. You develop excellent presentation skills because you are constantly presenting to companies. You're learning how do you put together a compelling discussion and sales pitch, and how do you talk to senior management at companies. When you're an investment banker doing M&A, you're dealing with the board of directors, you're dealing with the CEO and the CFO, and you really have to learn how to tailor your message, tailor your presentation. And so I learned a lot from that. And a lot about networking. The best bankers develop tremendous networks of people, and you come to appreciate the value of the networks that they build and the relationships that they build over time. And then finally, I think being a banker also gives you the ability to take a very big picture look at things, because you look at companies from kind of a global perspective. And often when you're in a company, you can get a very micro look at your company. You're looking at very specific things. But as an investment banker, you're looking at whole industries. You're looking at players within industries. And so it helps, give you that broader picture focus that sometimes is hard to develop when you're working within a company.
In your operating roles, you were at Times Warner, Microsoft, CEO of Jawbone, quite an interesting set of businesses. And thinking about all of that, how did you compare the learnings in these various companies that you were involved in? Did each one give you a kind of a separate, unique set of learnings about leadership, do you think?
Yes, most definitely. And every company had a very different culture. Time Warner was a great way for me to move from investment banking into the corporate world. It probably eased some of the culture shock because in a way, media companies really are very transaction-oriented companies. They're all about deals. They buy and sell companies very often. They do deals with artists. They do deals for films. So they're a very deal-driven business. So it was a business that I could come into, and my background as a person who did deals and negotiations fit quite well within the culture there. At the same time, it was a tremendous opportunity to learn how much impact you can have in a business. When I first joined Time Warner, it was shortly after the merger of Time Inc. and Warner Communications, and there was very little in the corporate center. And I was brought in to head up sort of an M&A and a strategy group. Nothing existed. And so I had the opportunity to build that group from the ground floor, the opportunity to do the very first long-term business plan that the company did, the very first board strategy offsites, the very first time that the company was pulling together all the divisions in strategy. And so it was a good chance. It's rare that you have a company that is that big in the world and that significant, but yet doesn't have some of these fundamental things, and you get the opportunity to put them in place. So that from a learning perspective was tremendous. And I had the opportunity to see what a real difference it made to the company and to the company's stock price. Because when they developed a plan that was a lot more focused on the returns on capital, they had a huge increase in their stock price in reaction to that. And so it was very rewarding. And then the other big lesson I had from Time Warner is how do you deal in a corporate environment where you have a lot of different cultures and personalities. The media business full of personalities. And at that time, they had 6 divisions, and the divisions had extremely different personalities. And as someone in the corporate center, I had to work with each of them. And over time, I developed a learning about what is the most effective way to work with each of these businesses. And those skills, learning about how do I adapt the way that I deal with people so that I can try to have most impact and try to encourage them and influence them to do what they need to do, ended up being super useful learning for later on in my career, when you often encounter people who have either a different approach or a different culture, and you have to figure out how do you impact and influence those people.
There's another interesting question here, which is the whole gender diversity issue. And at the time you were there, I suspect it wasn't even as, like it is today, which is more women are involved in leadership roles. And of course, you picked technology and finance and media, probably were even in some ways not as advanced as other industries. How did you deal with that personally, Mindy?
In a way, being good at mathematics was a help and an advantage. And what I mean by that is certainly through high school, there were hardly any women in the math classes. There might only be like 10, 15% of women in the advanced math classes. And so I kind of learned to live in a world where when I look at my eyes, like, hey, nothing's wrong. They're all men. Like nothing seems out of place. It's probably a lot harder for them to see me in the class than it is for me to see all of them in the class. And the other advantage of mathematics is that there's right and wrong answers. So if you're right, you're going to get an A in the class. No one can hold you back from that. And so coming out into Wall Street, I think it was helpful to go into professions that were very analytically based, at least in my early days, because I was an excellent actuary. They have all these exams. I got the exams done faster than almost anyone. I was an excellent modeler. I mean, believe me, you wanted me to be an associate on your merger deal because I built amazing models. And so in the early days of my career, that technical background really helped me. As I got further in my career, then yes, the challenges of being a woman started becoming more apparent, more when your success depends on other people, wanting you on their team. You have to work with companies. And again, it's you have to learn how to kind of work with the system. Now, fortunately, financial service businesses were among the first, both insurance companies and Wall Street. In the 70s and early 80s, they were among some of the first that were taking very proactive stances in hiring women and trying to encourage women. So when I was at Morgan Stanley, for example, they had events for the women investment bankers to teach leadership and some of those things where, so they were really quite a bit ahead of the curve of other industries. We didn't talk about my time at Microsoft, but the same thing, Microsoft was a company that, was working very hard to improve and encourage diversity in its ranks. And so I certainly, was a beneficiary of a lot of those programs and really appreciate the efforts that those companies made.
Let's move on to your board roles, if we could. So you've got this just fabulous background as you come into sitting on boards of directors, and just the flexibility and learnings that you have from these various businesses, I'm sure really makes you quite a valuable board member. You sit on 5 boards now, I think 3 public, 2 private. The first test of the day, Mindy, can you name the 5 companies for us?
Yes, I can. Well, Gary, we work together on Cerner. I'm on Technicolor, which is based out of Paris. And then I'm on the board of a special purpose acquisition vehicle called Group 9 Acquisition Corp. Those are my 3 publics, and my 2 private is Zayo, which is a company that is an infrastructure company in dark fiber. I've literally just joined that board within the last month. And then for about 6 years, I've been on the board of Learning Care Group, which is one of the largest early childhood education programs, daycare centers in the United States.
Well, what about the time sitting on 5 boards? Seems like a lot of your time is spent on board matters. How do you think about the time you spend, Mindy?
I'm unemployed, as you say. I left the full-time workforce a few years ago, and I'm someone who, I enjoy working and doing things. I knew that I wanted to do board work. My significant other is working full-time, quite busy, so it's not as if we're going to get up and go travel the world for 2 months. The nice thing about board work is that it comes and goes. Every day, I certainly have something that I have to do related to some board, either directly on a board or some kind of supplementary education I'm trying to do, some reading. But on the other hand, I still have big chunks of time that are free during the day. And I spent most of my career working in crisis type industries where you're working 60 hours a week, 80 hours in crazy times. And so, I was working weekends. So the idea that I could keep myself busy, but yet I still have a good half a day free, and generally free on the weekends, feels like a great deal. I feel like I have a lot of capacity and I can do the board work, but at the same time, spend time with friends and work out and do some of the fun activities that I knew I wanted to do when I left the full-time workforce.
How do you connect with boards?
I have to say, I've connected in a variety of ways. Probably the most common way is through people that through people that I know. My first board I went on was with someone I went to business school with. And he knew that he wanted to bring a technology person. And we've always kind of talked about, we liked each other in business school. It was like, hey, let's try to work together. And so it was that opportunity. 2 other boards came through connections. One came through one of the friends in my business school section was an investor in a company. And so they were trying to come up with names for people. And then, my name kind of got thrown in the hat. And then it turned out I'd worked with a couple other people on the board and they knew me. And they said, oh, great idea. It's that idea of connections and networks that people know you. They're comfortable with you. Another board, the board I just joined, I got connected to the board through someone else who's joining, who was someone that I used to work with back in my Time Warner days. And they described they were looking for someone for audit committee. And, she thought of me, and same thing. We've been looking for an opportunity to sit together. Technicolor, my first public company board, came through a recruiter, very traditional way. My background was very well suited to the business of the company, and so I knew quite a bit about that business. And then Cerner, I came on as a recommended candidate from Starboard, an activist investor, which is probably the more unusual. I don't know Starboard, but over my career, one of the things that I became kind of known for is that I helped improve operating performance of businesses. I did it at Time Warner, I did it at AOL, I did it with Xbox and Microsoft. And so somewhere along the line, I guess they heard about that, and through a recruiter reached out to me, and I chatted with them, and I got put on a list. And I would say, I hate to say it, but through all of my boards, there is a focus of getting women on boards. And so it helps people thinking of that. The activists want to have women they put on their slates. Audit committees, want to have women. So, it's that's been another element that has helped my name get on some of these slates.
Well, it's much needed. So good. And you've been a terrific Cerner board member from my observations. So well done there. What do you think of as the main responsibilities of a board, Mindy? How do you think about that?
Well, at a very high level, they always talk about a board as your primary responsibilities are kind of advising certain things, advising the management team, using your expertise to help them be better. There's certain things that you literally have to decide on, right? Hiring and firing the CEO, executive compensation, setting the tone for compliance of the organization. And then there's a whole set of roles that are around monitoring. Is the company doing what it's saying? How are they doing against risk and compliance activities? So, I think it kind of easily splits into those buckets.
What thoughts do you have about qualities of a good board member? I mean, we look at your background, it's very rich, very diverse, which seems to me to be a terrific background for board member. Most people don't have that diversity of background as you do. So what are the main qualities, do you think, of a good board member?
I mean, look, at a very high level, you need to have good judgment or wisdom, typically gathered through years of experience, because at the end of the day, you're offering your opinions about things, and the company is going to benefit by having someone who has high quality opinions, high quality judgments. You really certainly want board members who are going to be very actively engaged, very motivated to be on the board, who are going to read the materials, understand the business. Certainly the most valuable board members are the type who have a deep expertise in the business, who've had the opportunity to understand the industry from a variety of ways of looking at it. But there's other board members who can add value to the extent that they have some kind of expertise that could be helpful to the company. It could be industry expertise. A lot of it could be functional expertise, whether that's finance or technology, but that you have something meaningful that you can contribute that's going to help the company. You need to have worked in environments. Typically, I do think of comparable size, at least to the company that you're dealing with, because you need to have a good understanding of the scale and scope of the company and what that really involves in terms of dealing with employees, in terms of the complexity of issues that company is going to overcome. I mean, if you only worked in small businesses, you'd be hard pressed to make a real contribution to a company like Walmart. I mean, their issues are all different. But I think, when you're around that same level of size, sometimes it can be helpful if a company is trying to innovate and grow. For example, if you've had the opportunity to be in innovation type businesses, again, that goes back to the types of experiences that you may have. You really need to have courage and be independently minded. There aren't that many people on a board, and everyone's thoughts and best ideas matter. And so you want people who are going to do the work and form judgments and aren't just going to go along with the crowd. because that's what everybody's doing. I mean, you hope everyone has the right thing, but if someone has a different opinion, you have to have the confidence to voice that opinion and express what your issues are. And then, the final thing is really being respectful to other board members, to the management team, really listening. I think the best dynamics in a board is one where everyone has the opportunity to speak. No one dominates a conversation. Everyone listens and really tries to hear what each of the board members are saying, so that you are getting the benefit of their deep pool of knowledge.
So you've developed an expertise in audit committees, which, given your background, you can kind of see how that would develop. But how do you think about it? Why have you developed this expertise in audit committees, Mindy?
Well, I'm a finance person by background, so it's natural. I've spent all of my career in one form or fashion looking over P&Ls, thinking about how do you make companies more valuable. I will say at a very practical level, when I left the full-time workforce and I knew that I wanted to be on boards, I knew that I was going to be on an audit committee because of my background. And so I specifically set out to really educate myself about the parts of that work that I didn't understand. I took accounting classes in college, but it was, 40 years ago or whatever. So I took courses out of Berkeley business school program in, intermediate accounting, advanced accounting, audit, to try to kind of really refresh my skills. And then then started reading a lot of things online, networking with people. I just enjoy it. I enjoy, at the end of the day, the audit committee is the group that ensures the financial integrity of the company, of its financial statements. And it's a very deep responsibility to the company and the shareholders. And I enjoy being a part of making sure that the market can rely on those financial statements and that the company is keeping aware of the risks that could happen and is prepared for how to deal with those risks.
You've led into the next question, which is, what are the special responsibilities of a chair of the audit committee?
At a high level, the chair sets the agenda for the year, the calendar. The chair works with the CFO to kind of set the calendar for what are the things that the audit committee needs to look at. The chair certainly sets the tone for what's the expectation for internal audit, for external audit. They ensure that the members of the audit committee are engaged. And I think it's really the chair who takes that little bit of extra time with the company, with the external accountants, with the internal members of management to understand what's really happening at the company, what are some of the issues, and make sure that the key issues or the key things that the audit committee members should be aware of get highlighted and brought forward where people can see it and talk about it.
Another topic that is frequently discussed is the swim lanes of the board relative to management, and how governance is governance and management is management. How do you think about that balance between governance and management, Mindy?
From my experience on boards, what I've seen is that when everything is working really well, it's quite easy to oversee, right? To look at management. Where that line becomes harder and harder is when something's going a little sideways, right? When the board starts maybe losing a little confidence, when the board is feeling that they're not getting the right level of transparency. There's that saying about noses in and fingers out, which a lot of boards like to quote. And certainly it's a good reminder that we're there to advise and monitor. We're not really there to run the business. But that saying does get challenged when you're having difficulties. And what if you don't like the strategy that the CEO has come up with? What if you don't believe that their you don't like the results that you're seeing from the business. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that as a board? And I think that's where the challenge is, and the teamwork at the board level in terms of, how do you go through harder times? How do you set the bar high enough for management and push them to do the things that you want them to do? Or, then you have to make the decision to, ultimately you're not going to run the company, you're going to change the management team. But it is a very long journey, can be very challenging at a board level to kind of make those decisions.
Let's look at three of your companies. One is Technicolor. And can you just tell us about Technicolor and what the business model is?
Technicolor right now has three main businesses. They have one, I would call a declining business, Cash Cow, which is they print DVDs. They do all the DVDs for effectively all in the United States and in most places around the world, sort of the last standing company. Then they have a business that then about half the business is one that does set-top boxes and network gateways for cable and satellite companies around the world. And I would call the set-top box business is declining, and the network gateway business is growing slowly, kind of at a maturity level, but there's definite growth there as the internet just continues to grow and strongly around the world. And then they have a third part of the business, which is a high growth part of the business, which is special effects for movies, TV shows, and advertising. So it's quite a melange.
Did on the latter part of the business, did COVID, particularly last year, affect that business?
Yeah, COVID was very hard. Ironically, the DVD business and the network gateway business were doing really quite well because people were at home. They wanted things to do. But it was very, very difficult. They stopped making films. And so, you had an entire company, which is largely people, it's largely artists based around the world. And there were no films. So it was a very challenging time for that part of the business.
So Technicolor went through a restructuring, financial restructuring, without getting into a lot of details. What about the board? How did the board relate to that whole process?
We knew that we were going to need capital, and we had been on a plan to raise capital. And it was right in the middle of us preparing for that capital raise that COVID hit. So, first of all, I would say good lesson, about time, right? You don't always have all the time. You never know when one of these things is going to hit. I think the board came together fairly quickly. We had some investors on the board. And so they were quite helpful in terms of getting capital, having everyone come together. I mean, the board, we had to form a special committee of the board, which was really dealt with the day-to-day of the restructuring. This company is based in France. Their rules are a little different than the U.S., but it was a little bit very similar to what would be a Chapter 11 prepackaged bankruptcy here. And I would say that it had... the board was quite engaged, the special committee of the board. The management team worked very hard. We had just brought in anticipation of the capital raise, we had brought in a new CEO with a new strategy, which was part of the capital plan. And so this was his, welcome to the new job. Fortunately, the strength of the company is actually the world leader in each of its three businesses. Which made it, we were able to raise the capital that we needed for the restructuring. But it was, 2020 was a very busy year.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's cover the second company, which is Cerner. And you had some experience in healthcare when you were running Fitbit, but Cerner is really kind of deep into healthcare. How do you go about learning about healthcare, and what have you learned about healthcare during your time there?
Right. Yeah, it's been fun. Well, we have some, super knowledgeable people on the board, like you, Gary, and some of the other people. So it's been an opportunity to certainly learn a lot. I would say, first of all, focus group of one, I go to doctors, I go to places. So I will say, since I joined Cerner, I'm always, watching what they're entering, how they're entering it. Which is fun. Healthcare is an interesting industry because I would say, I'm not an expert in healthcare, but it has become such a large part of GDP that almost everyone knows something about healthcare. You know someone who works in healthcare. You have your local town. A big part of employment is the local healthcare system. So it is something that that you know a lot about. Probably the most challenging part of healthcare is the whole government relationship in it, the whole payer relationship. How that makes things harder or more challenging. The financial, I guess I had never really focused a lot on the actual financials of the various hospitals and their own financial challenges and what that means about what they can and cannot do. So I think that I've gotten a much better understanding of those things. And I have gotten a little bit better understanding. I was the president of Jawbone, and that was a wearable, and certainly a big part of that vision was using your data to make your health better. It was a great part of the data, but being in the company, I also saw the challenge of what do you do with all this data that you gather? There's the promise and the frustration of data in the healthcare world, because it's very hard to take this data and turn it into something meaningful that can really move the dial, and that could really be a business. That was a struggle with Jawbone. I mean, we had all this data, but yet, telling people what time they worked up, or gee, when there was an earthquake, everybody woke up. I mean, these weren't really huge insights. And I've had the opportunity to see at Cerner, as they've continued that work, there's this great benefit. Now, Cerner has a ton more data, and it's been a huge area of their focus, and how they've taken some of those ideas and start putting them into some very particular practices that really are benefiting people and helping make improving outcomes, improving, population health, has been tremendous to learn a little bit more about that, because that's what's really going to have tremendous impact on the health of people in the coming decades.
Yeah, well, fully agree with that for sure. The third company you're involved with is Learning Care Group. Can you share some information about Learning Care Group? What kind of business are they in and so on?
Right. Well, Learning Care Group is in early childhood education. It's what people call daycare. They're changing it to early childhood education because that's really what it is. They're not babysitters, but they are working with kids to try to help kids prepare better for school. It is a large organization. They have over 900 centers around the United States. They have over, I don't know, the latest, I want to say over 100,000 children in their care regularly. And so that's been a tremendous opportunity being part of that company because, first of all, they're doing just very good work, right? I mean, it's just a huge help to parents to help them with their childcare needs. They have a big piece of their program is government sponsored kids who are getting supplements from local governments. So it's helping out, some children with early childhood education. It's been tremendous. My role on that board is about technology and how can technology help both the outcomes for children as well as the administration doing a better job with compliance. How can you do a better job maintaining? How do you do a better job training teachers? And it's been really, really rewarding to watch the advances that they've been able to make in those areas certainly over the 6 years that I've been on the board.
I imagine COVID hit them pretty hard last year.
2020 was a busy year for me. That was another company that, certainly needed to do an additional capital raise. When you run into the issue and you have to take, some very dramatic issues in the short term to manage your cost base against that. On the other hand, it's provided some great opportunities because part of that business is acquiring other businesses, and there are a lot of smaller operators who are finding in this environment it's very hard for them to sustain. So it's created some opportunities for buying some nice additions to the business. So, some challenges, but on the other hand, some opportunities also.
So do you see some overlap just in terms of learnings? Technology is one you mentioned. Obviously, all three of these companies, technology is big. I would think compliance and regulatory might be somewhat similar between Learning Company and Cerner. I mean, is that something that you expected, or is that a useful part of sitting on boards?
Well, what's very fun is I do love technology and I have a solid understanding. I'm not a super technical person, but I have a pretty solid understanding. And it's been quite a bit of fun to see all the different ways that technology can help a business, improve a business. Whether that's in special effects, where, I mean, clearly special effects really are digital, but now with some of the new technologies, you can have people all around the world working on the same section of a movie. Or you can pass a movie around the world, right? Work on it in the US during the day and then pass it off to India at night for people to work on, which wasn't really possible, 10 years ago. How technology can improve both the administration of the business, the compliance elements of a business, as well as how you relate to your customers. So it's been fun to see the variety of ways that technology can be useful to a business and help make businesses better and enable them more.
Just thinking about difficult decisions as a board member, and without going deeper than you should go, what do you think the most difficult decision that you've had to make as a board member to this point?
Much like work, I think the most difficult decisions are always around people. When it's time, when you think you need a new CEO, it's always very difficult because typically you start having those discussions before you're held in a handbasket at work. In other words, part of the board is to see that there's the problem coming and to deal with it before it has major impact. But that also means that when you start introducing the discussion, maybe not everybody in the board's on agreement that you need to do this. And there's always going to be people who want to wait. It also gets very emotional, as you can imagine. The CEO job is a very difficult one, and the people who do it, they're putting their heart and soul into this. And sometimes they're not bad people; they're just not the right people for what the company needs at that time. And it's much like at work; it's always very difficult when you have to change out people and the discussions that you have around that. And it's very emotional, certainly, but at the end of the day, this isn't these aren't judgments about whether it's a good person or a bad person. It's just simply they don't have the right skill set for what we need right now. Maybe they didn't have the right strategy, and it's our job to make these hard decisions.
This has just been a terrific interview, Mindy. We thank you for your time. Just as we wrap up, two questions really. One is, what advice would you have for people that haven't yet sat on boards, that are thinking about it? What advice would you have for how to think about being a good board member and preparing for that?
Certainly, while you're still active in your career, I would encourage you to go on the boards of nonprofits. It's not exactly the same as a corporate board, but you do learn a lot of good lessons about just general governance. And certainly I was very active on a lot of nonprofits and had leadership positions on various nonprofit boards during the time that I was working full time. And then I think, part of it is really thinking about, what is it that you can really bring to a board? What's your expertise? You need to have, enough expertise either in a particular subject matter or in an industry where you're going to make a meaningful impact. And so if you want to be on a board, part of that is then take a career path that's going to give you those experiences. If you're a finance person, it certainly would be helpful to be a CFO of a public company. It certainly is very helpful to have leadership positions in businesses and, aggressively start, looking for how you can get the experiences that put you into those positions, which will then sort of set you up for the boards. And then the third one is about networking. The best board opportunities are going to come from people people who know you and are comfortable with you. So, always keep up your network, keep in touch with folks, make sure that they know. And when you're at that point in your career where you have the qualifications to be on a board, it is important to kind of be out there and let people know that you're looking for those opportunities.
So the final question, is another advice question, Mindy. And this would be for the earlier stage leaders in our audience. What advice do you have for them about leadership and how to develop as a better leader?
First of all, just for anyone working, just be great at what you do. Just understand the basics, understand your material, don't make silly mistakes. Because, one is it's great grounding and you need that credibility that not only do you get stuff done, but it gets done well, and build that as part of your brand. The other thing I would say is in an organization, I call it be very front-footed, embrace challenges, look for opportunities. Be proactive. Don't wait for assignments to come your way. Look for opportunities that you can exploit or problems that you see needing to get fixed. Be the solution-oriented person who tries to fix things, not the person who sits in the hallway and, throws stones at, and likes to gossip about the latest problems in the company. But be the solution-oriented person who's trying to fix things and make things better. I would also say, as hard as it is, embrace feedback. If you want to be a leader, you have to be great. And the way you get great, it's like if you're in a sport, you need coaching. You need people to tell you, that you didn't do something quite well and you need to do it better. And don't take it personally. It's no more personal than, when you did gymnastics and you forgot to point your toes, just try to be better. And even if you think that the feedback is wrong, there's a saying, perception is reality. Like, whether it's right or wrong, that was the other person's perception. And you have to recognize that and try to make that better. And when things go wrong, even if it didn't involve you, take a moment and think about, did I contribute to that? What did I do that might have contributed to that issue that I could do differently? And it's that sense of personal accountability. But if you really want to get better, you just have to embrace these things. Take risks. Don't be afraid. I mean, I'm not sure that you need to take as many risks as I did in my career. I took a lot of left turns. I was an actuary, and then I decided to go to Wall Street, and then I went to New York, and then I went to Microsoft. It all paid off. But I think that sometimes going off the path can be useful. If something seems like a good idea to you, sometimes, just take a right turn and go do it. That's how you learn new things, how you develop and you meet people. And then, the final thing I would say is, never forget that people are just, it's the center for everything. It's the reason for everything. First of all, if you want to be a leader, you need to be an attractor of talent. You want the best people to work for you. And the way that they're going to want to work for you is that you're going to make them better. They're going to learn from you. So really growing and developing people is going to make you a great leader. You're going to have a great team. A lot of my career, you can just see I'm always connecting with people that I knew, the people that keep in touch with the people that you never know. The world is amazingly small and they're going to come around again. And, I will say the final lesson is that when I was working in the early days of my career, I'm a very task-focused person. Give me the project, get me that. I would have such pride in the great projects that I'd done. But with the passage of time in my career, I came to learn that, these projects, these accomplishments, they fade in time. They fade so fast. Nobody remembers them in the collective memory, 5 years after you did something. But the real legacy of your career is about the people. It's about the people that you grew and developed and helped along the way. The people who worked for me are going to remember, the advice I gave them, the way I helped them. They're going to remember that for 40 years. No one's going to remember the first business plan that I did for Time Warner. I'm sure there's nobody who remembers that anymore. But I've touched so many people that I've worked with, and they're going to remember the good things that I did to help them grow and in their careers. And at the end of the day, I realized that really is the legacy of my career, and it could be the legacy of your career.
Mindy, thanks for sharing your wisdom with us. We appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you so much. It was such a privilege to be here. I appreciate it. Thank you, Barry.